to another Teen Talk Tuesday. My name is Miss Lindsay, and today I will be reading The Rise of Kyoshi by F.C. Yee with Avatar co-creator Michael Dante Dimartino. So if you are a fan of the Avatar Legend of Korra series, then I think you'll like this one. This is the story of Avatar Kyoshi. Here we go. Chapter 1. The Test. Yokoya Port was a town easy to overlook. Situated on the edge of Whale Tail Strait, it could have been a major restocking point for ships leaving one of the many harbors that supplied Omashu. But the strong, reliable prevailing winds made it too easy and cost-effective for southbound merchants to cruise right past it and reach Shimsan Big Island in a straight shot. Jiansu wondered if the locals knew or cared that ships laden with riches sailed tantalizingly close by, while they were stuck elbows deep in the cavity of another elephant koi. Ooh. Only a quirk of fate and weather kept piles of gold, spices, precious books, and scrolls from landing on their doorstep. Instead, their lot was fish guts, a wealth of maws and gills. The landward side was even less promising. The soil of the peninsula grew thin and rocky as it extended farther into the sea. It had disturbed Jiansu to see crop fields so meager and balding as he'd rode through the countryside into town for the first time. The farmland lacked the wild, volcanic abundance of the Makapu Valley, or the carefully ordered productivity of Ba Sing Se's outer ring, where growth bent to the exacting will of the king's planners. Here, a farmer would have to be grateful for whatever sustenance they could pull from the dirt. The settlement lay on the intersection of three different nations: earth, air, and water. And yet, none had ever laid much of a claim to it. The conflicts of the outside world had little impact on daily life for the Yokoyans. To them, the ravages of the Yellowneck uprising in the deep interior of the Earth Kingdom was a less interesting story than the wayward flying bison that had gotten loose from the air temple and knocked the thatching off a few roofs last week. Despite being seagoers, they probably couldn't name any of the dreaded pirate leaders carving up the eastern waters in open defiance of the Ba Sing Se Navy. All in all, Yokoya Port might as well not have been on the map, which meant, for Jiansu and Kelsang's desperate, sacrilegious little experiment, it was perfect. Jiansu trudged uphill in the wet, mucky snowfall, his neck prickling from the bundled straw cloak around his shoulders. He passed the wooden pillar that marked the spiritual center of this village without sparing it a glance. There was nothing on the sides or on top of it. It was just a bare log driven upright into the ground of a circular courtyard. It wasn't carved with any decorations, which seemed lazy for a town where nearly every adult had a working knowledge of carpentry. There, the post grudgingly said to any nearby spirits, "Hope you're happy." Weathered houses lined the broad, eroded avenue, poking steeply into the air like spear points. His destination was the larger, two-story meeting hall at the end. Kelsang had set up shop there yesterday, saying he needed as much floor space as possible for the test. He'd also claimed that the location enjoyed some auspicious wind currents, using the very solemn and holy method of licking his finger and holding it up in the air. Whatever helped, Jiansu sent a quick prayer to the guardian of the divine log as he pulled off his snow boots, laid them on the porch, and ducked through the door curtains. The interior of the hall was surprisingly large, with far corners draped in shadow and thick planked walls cut from what must have been truly massive trees. The air smelled of resin. 10 very long, very faded yellow claws stretched across the worn floorboards. A row of toys lay on each one, evenly spaced like a seedbed. A bison whistle, a wicker ball, a misshapen blob that might have been a stuffed turtle duck, a coiled whalebone sprung, one of those flappy drums that made noise if you spun it back and forth between your palms. The toys looked as worn and beaten as the outside of this building. Kelsing knelt at the end of the claws. The Airbender monk was busy placing more knickknacks with a carefulness and precision that rivaled an acupuncturist setting their needles. As if it mattered whether the miniature boat sailed east or west, he stayed on his hands and knees, shuffling his great bulk sideways, his billowing orange robes and wiry black beard hanging so low they made another sweep over a floor that had already been scrubbed. "I didn't know there were so many toys," Jiansu said to his old friend. He spotted a large white marble that looked too close to the edge of the fabric, and with a graceful extension of his wrist, levitated it with earth bending in front of Kelsing. It hovered like a fly, waiting for the attention. Kelsing didn't look up as he plucked the marble out of the air and put it right back where it had started. "There's thousands. I'd ask you to help, but you wouldn't do it right." Jiansu's head hurt from the statement. At this point, they were well past doing it right. "How did you change Abbot Dorji's mind about giving you the relics?" he asked. "The same way you convinced Liu Beifong to let us administer the air normad test in the Earth cycle," Kelsing said calmly as he recentered a wooden top. "I didn't." Like a certain friend of theirs from the Water Tribe always said, it was better to ask for forgiveness than wait for permission. And as far as Jiansu was concerned, the time for waiting had long passed. When Avatar Kuruk, the keeper of balance and peace in the world, the bridge between spirits and humans, passed away at the ripe old age of 33. 33! The only time Kuruk had ever been early for anything. It became the duty of his friends, his teachers, and other prominent benders to find the new avatar, reincarnated into the next nation of the elemental cycle. Earth, fire, air, water, and then earth again, in order as unchanging as the seasons. A process stretching far back nearly 1,000 generations before Kuruk, and one that would hopefully continue for 1,000 more. Except this time, it wasn't working. It had been 7 years since Kuruk's death, 7 years of fruitless searching. Jiansu had pored over every available record from the 4 nations, going back hundreds of years, and the hunt for the Avatar had never faltered like this in documented history. No one knew why, though revered elders traded guesses behind closed doors. The world was impure and had been abandoned by the spirits. The Earth Kingdom lacked cohesion, or maybe it was the Water Tribe and the poles that needed to unify. The Airbenders had to come down from their mountains and get their hands dirty instead of preaching. The debate went on and on. Jiansu cared less about appropriating blame and more about the fact that he and Kelsing had let down their friend again. The only serious decree of Kuruk's before he departed from the living was that his closest companions find the next avatar and do right by them. And so far, they failed spectacularly. Right now, there should have been a happy, burbling 7-year-old Earth avatar in the care of their loving family, being watched over by a collection of the best, wisest benders of the world. A child in the midst of being prepared for the assumption of their duties at the age of 16. Instead, there was only a gaping void that grew more dangerous by the day. Jiansu and the other masters did their best to keep the missing avatar a secret, but it was no use. The cruel, the power-hungry, the lawless, people who normally have the most to fear from the avatar, were starting to feel the scales shifting in their favor, like sand sharks responding to the slightest vibrations on pure instinct. They tested their limits, probed new grounds. Time was running out. Kelsang finished setting up when the noon gong struck. The sun was high enough to melt snow off the roof, and the dripping flow of water pattered onto the ground like light rain. The silhouettes of villagers and their children queuing up for the test could have been outside through the paper screen windows. The air was full of excited chatter. No more waiting, Jiangsu thought. This happened now. Earth avatars were traditionally identified by directional geomancy, a series of rituals designed to winnow through the largest and most populous of the four nations as effectively as possible. Each time a special set of bone trigrams was cast and interpreted by the earthbending masters, half the Earth Kingdom was ruled out as the location of the newborn avatar. Then, from the remaining territory, another half, and then another half. The possible locations kept shrinking until the searchers were brought to the doorstep of the Earth Avatar child. It was a quick way to cover ground and entirely fitting to the earth-bending state of mind. A question of logistics, simple to the point of being brutal. And it normally worked on the first try. Jiangsu had been part of expeditions sent by the bones to barren fields, empty gem caverns below Ba Sing Se, a patch of the Siwang Desert so dry that not even the sandbenders bothered with it. Liu Beifang had read the trigrams. King Buro of Omashu gave it a shot. Nelio, the gardener, took her turn. The masters worked their way down through the earth-bending hierarchy until Jiangsu racked up his fair share of misses as well. His friendship with Kurek brought him no special privileges when it came to the next avatar. After the last attempt had placed him on an iceberg in the North Pole with only turtle seals as potential candidates, Jiangsu became open to radical suggestions. A drunken commercian with Kelsang spawned a promising new idea. If the ways of the Earth Kingdom weren't working, why not try another nation's method? After all, wasn't the Avatar the only bender of all four elements and honorary citizen of the entire world? That was why the two of them were wiping their noses with tradition and trying the air nomad way of identifying the Avatar. Yokoya would be a practice run, a safe place far from the turmoil of land and sea, where they would take notes and fix problems. If Yokoya went smoothly, they could convince their elders to expand the test farther through the Earth Kingdom. The air nomad's method was simple, in theory. Out of the many toys laid out, only 4 belonged to avatars of eras gone by. Each 7-year-old child of the village would be brought in and presented with a dazzling array of playthings. The one who was drawn to the 4 special toys in a resemblance of their past lives was the Avatar Reborn, a process as elegant and harmonious as the Airbenders themselves. In theory. In practice, it was chaos, pure and unhinged. It was disaster like the likes of which the 4 nations had never witnessed. Jiangsu hadn't thought of what might happen after the children who failed the test were told to leave their selections behind and make room for the next candidate. The tears, wailing, screaming, trying to get toys from kids who had only moments before been promised they could have been their pick. There was no force in existence stronger than a child's righteous fury at being robbed. The parents were worse. Maybe air nomad caretakers handled the rejection of their young ones with grace and humility, but families in the other nations weren't made up of monks and nuns, especially in the Earth Kingdom, where all bets were off once it came to blood ties. Villagers whom he'd shared friendly greetings with in the days leading up to the test became snarling canyon crawlers once they'd been told that their precious little Jay or Mirai was not in fact the most important child in the world, as they'd secretly known all along. More than a few swore up and down that they'd seen their offspring play with invisible spirits or bend earth and air at the same time. Kelsing would push back gently. Are you sure your child wasn't earthbending during a normal breeze? Are you sure the baby wasn't simply playing? Some couldn't take a hint, especially the village captain. As soon as they passed over her daughter, Ayoma, or something, she'd given them a look of utter contempt and demanded to see a higher-ranking master. Sorry, lady, Jiansu thought after Kelsing spent nearly 10 minutes talking her down. We can't all be special. For the last time, I am not negotiating a salary with you, Jiansu shouted in the face of a particularly blunt farmer. Being the Avatar is not a paid position. The stocky man shrugged. Sounds like a waste of time then. I'll take my child and go. Out of the corner of his eye, Jiansu caught Kelsing frantically waving his hands, making a cut-off sign at his neck. The little girl had wandered over to the whirly flying toy that had once entertained an ancient Avatar and was staring at it intently. They weren't intending to get a genuine result today, but picking the first item correctly was already improbable. Too improbable to risk stopping now. Okay, Jiansu said. This would have to come out of his own pocket. 50 silvers a year if she's the Avatar. 65 silvers a year if she's the Avatar, and 10 if she's not. Why would I pay you if she's not the Avatar? Jiansu roared. Kelsing coughed and thumped loudly on the floor. The girl had picked up the whirling and was eyeing the drum. 2 out of 4 correct. Out of thousands. Holy shoo. I mean, of course, Jiansu said quickly. Deal. They shook hands. It would be ironic, a prank worthy of Kurek's sense of humor, to have his reincarnation be found as a result of a peasant's greed. And the very last child in line for testing to boot, Jiansu nearly chuckled. Now the girl had the drum in her arms as well. She walked over to a stuffed hog monkey. Kelsing was beside himself with excitement, his neck threatening to burst through his wooden beads wrapped around it. Jiansu felt lightheaded. Hope bashed against his ribcage, begging it to be let out after so many years trapped inside. The girl wound up her foot and stomped on the stuffed animal as hard as she could. Die! She screamed in her tiny little treble. She ground it under her heel, the stitches audibly ripping. The light went out of Kelsing's face. He looked as if he'd witnessed a murder. 10 silvers, the farmer said. Get out, Jiansu snapped. Come on, Suzu, the farmer called. Let's get. After wrestling the other toys away from the butcher of hogs monkeys, he scooped the girl up and walked out of the door. The whole escapade, nothing but a business transition. In doing so, he nearly bowled over another child who had been spying on the proceeds from the outside. Hey, Jiansu said, you forgot your other daughter. That one's not mine, the farmer said as he thumped down the steps on the streets. That one ain't anyone's. An orphan, then? Jiansu had spotted the under-chaperoned girl around town in the days before, but maybe he'd glossed over her, thinking she was too old to be a candidate. She was much, much taller than any of the other children who'd been brought in by their parents. As Jiansu walked over to examine what he'd missed, the girl quavered, threatening to flee, but her curiosity won her over her fright. She remained where she was. Underfed, Jiansu thought with a frown as he looked over the girl's hollow cheeks and cracked lips. And definitely an orphan. He'd seen hundreds of children like her in the inner provinces where outlawed Dao Fei ran unchecked, their parents slain by whatever bandit group was ascendant in the territory. She must have wandered far into the relatively peaceful area of Yokoya. Upon hearing about the Avatar test, the families of the village had dressed their eligible children in their finest garments, as if it were a festival day. But this child was wearing a threadbare coat with her elbows poking through the holes in the sleeves. Her oversized feet threatened to burst the straps of her too small sandals. None of the local farmers were feeding or clothing her. Kelsang, despite his fearsome appearance, was always better with children, joined them and stooped down. With a smile, he transformed from an intimidating orange mountain into a giant-sized version of the stuffed toys behind him. Why, hello there, he said, putting an extra layer of friendliness into his booming rumble. What's your name? The girl took a long, guarded moment, sizing them up. Kyoshi, she whispered. Her eyebrows nodded as if revealing her name was a painful concession. Kelsey took in her tattered state, and avoided the subject of her parents for now. Kyoshi, would you like a toy? Are you sure she isn't too old? Jiansu said. She's bigger than some of the teenagers. Hush, you, Kelsey said. He made a sweeping gesture at the hall festooned with relics, for Kyoshi's benefit. The unveiling of so many playthings at once had an entrancing effect on most of the children. But Kyoshi didn't gasp, or smile, or move a muscle. Instead, she maintained eye contact with Kelsey until he blinked. As quick as a whip, she scampered by him, snagged an object off the floor, and ran back to where she was standing on the porch. She gauged Kelsey and Jiansu for their response as intently as they watched her. Kelsey glanced at Jiansu and tilted his head at the clay turtle Kyoshi clutched at her chest. One of the 4 true relics. Not a single candidate had come anywhere near it today. They should have been as excited for her as they'd been for evil little Suzu. But Jiansu's heart was clouded with doubt. It was hard to believe they'd be so lucky after that previous head fake. Good choice, Kelsey said. But I've got a surprise for you. You can have 4 more toys to yourself. Wouldn't you like that? Jiansu sensed a shift in the girl's stance, a tremor in her foundation that was obvious through the wooden floorboards. Yes, she would like 3 more toys very much. What child wouldn't? But in her mind, the promise of more was dangerous, a lie designed to hurt her. If she loosened her grip on the single prize she held right now, she would end up with nothing, punished for believing in the kindness of the stranger. Kyoshi shook her head. Her knuckles whitened around the clay turtle. It's okay, Kelsey said. You don't have to put that down. That's the whole point. You can choose different... Hey! The girl took a step back and then another. And then, before they could react, she was sprinting down the hill with one-of-a-kind, centuries-old Avatar relic in her hands. Halfway along the street, she took a sharp turn like an experienced fugitive throwing off a pursuer and disappeared into the space between the houses. Jiansu closed his eyes against the sun. The light came through them in scarlet bolts. He could feel his own pulse. His mind was somewhere else right now. Instead of Yokoya, he stood in the center of an unnamed village deep in the interior of the Earth Kingdom, newly liberated by Zhu Ping An and the Yellow Necks. In the waking dream, the stench of rotting flesh soaked through his clothes, and the cries of survivors haunted the wind. Next to him, an official messenger who'd been carried there by palanquin read from a scroll, spending minute after minute listing the Earth King's honorifics, only to end by telling Jiansu that reinforcements from His Majesty's army would not be coming to help. He tried to shake free of the memory, but the past had set its jagged hooks into him. Now he sat at a negotiating table made of pure ice. And on the other side was Turlock, Lord of the 5th Nation Pirates. The elder corsair laughed his consumptive laugh at the notion he might honor his grandfather's promise to leave the southern coastlands of the continent in peace. His convulsions spattered blood and phlegm over the accords drafted by Avatar Yanchen in her own holy hand, while his daughter, Lieutenant, watched by his side, her soulless gaze boring into Jiansu like he was so much prey. In these times, and in many others, he should have been at the right hand of the Avatar, the ultimate authority who would bend the world to their will. Instead, he was alone, facing down great beasts of land and sea, their jaws closing in, encasing the kingdom in darkness. Kelsey yanked him back to the present with a bruising slap on the back. Come on, he said. With the way you look, people would think you just lost your nation's most important cultural artifact. The Airbender's good humor and ability to take setbacks in stride was normally a great comfort to Jiansu. But right now, he wanted to punch his friend in his stupid bearded face. He composed his own features. We need to go after her, he said. Kelsey pursed his lips. It would feel bad to take the relic away from a child who was so little. She can hang on to it. I'll go back to the temple and face Dorothy's wrath alone. There's no need for you to implicate yourself. Jiansu didn't know what counted for wrath among airbenders, but that wasn't the issue here. You'd ruin the air nomad test to make a child happy? He said incredulously. It'll find its way back to where it belongs. Kelsing looked around and paused. Then his smile faded, as if this little blot of a town were a harsh dose of reality that was only now taking effect. Eventually, he said. Maybe. And that was Chapter 1 of The Rise of Kyoshi. If you want to hear more, definitely tune in next time. And thank you very much for joining me today. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.